Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. You said you were good, and then you said you
okay.
weren't. And then you ran.
It's gonna happen again. It's gonna happen again. I mean,
as long as you don't fall out of the chair again.
Again, right.
We'll be golden.
Welcome to TBR Lowdown.
Sometimes we fall out of our chairs.
Sometimes we do.
That's how much we love books.
I think I need a lozenge.
It's a full contact podcast.
It is. Oh, that's very loud when I do that. Just got a little, just to coat the throat.
Okay, coat your throat.
Okay.
If you're not aware, Naomi is sick.
We're making it do what it do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because we are committed to bringing you.
We are.
A Monday podcast.
That's right.
Where we're going to be a little chaotic. Maybe a lot.
Maybe.
But we're going to talk about books and book-related things.
We are. We absolutely are.
But
welcome to the TBR Lowdown. Yeah. Shall I kick off what I've been reading?
Yes. What have you been reading?
You're going to love it. I've been reading Death Takes Me by Cristina Rivera Garza.
Ooh, I need to start that at some point.
Yeah.
I'm sitting over. Oh, it's over there.
And this is translated from is it Spanish?
It's Spanish.
By Sarah Booker and, Robin Myers. I just started this yesterday.
I think she's Mexican, but I could be wrong.
I just started this yesterday. I'm not very far in. I actually really don't know what this is about. We start off and we know that someone is dead, and someone's dead, and she's describing this person's death, and we know that she has been brought in for questioning, and she's conversing with this detective about what she knows, and immediately we're introduced to art and poetry. So I've already learned some things just off the first, chapter. So maybe I should read the because there's no description on this arc. Oh, and thank you, Hogarth, for this.
Yes, and thank you for mine as well, because I get so little from Hogarth. So really extra big thanks.
I know. And you got on their list this year, right? Because I know we talked about that.
Sort of. I got this. I got well, I think I won that off of an Instagram post. The what's the yellow book? Shady People.
Oh, a funny place for
Mariana Enriquez. Yes. I think I won that off an Instagram post. So I don't know how much I'm on their list or not. It's so, but anyway, thank you, Hogarth. Yeah, you know that I love you.
Hogarth publishes some freaking bangers. That's what I can. Yes. That's what I can say.
At least books that are bangers to me.
Yeah. So I'm only a chapter in, and there's no thing on here, so I'm going to read what it says on the web. All right. So it says, a city is always a cemetery. When a professor named Cristina Rivera Garza stumbles upon a corpse of a man in a dark alley, she finds a stark warning scrawled on the brick wall beside the body, written in coral nail: "Beware of me, my love. Beware of the silent woman in the desert." After reporting the crime to the police, the professor becomes the lead informant of the case, led by a detective with a newfound obsession with poetry and a long list of failures on her back. But what has the professor really seen? As more bodies of men are found across the city, the detective tries to decipher the meaning of the poems as if they are facing a darker stream of violence spreading throughout the city. Death Takes Me is a thrilling masterpiece of literary fiction that flips the traditional crime narrative on its head in a world where death is rampant and violence is gendered. Written in sentences as sharp as the cuts on the bodies of the victims, a word which, in Spanish, is always feminine. Death Takes Me unfolds with the charged logic of a dream, moving from the professor's classroom into the slippery worlds of Latin American poetry and art as it explores with a masterful imagination the unstable terrains of desire and sexuality. I can't wait to get further through this book. I'm excited.
What I'm really interested about in that is that like sentence that you read, or that little statement about how victim is always
and the feminine.
Yeah, and so many languages are gendered, and I'm interesting to see how and if that sort of gets played with as well in the story, the language aspect of it and the gendered aspect of it, and how that gets maybe. I don't know if any of it's in there, but that's kind of something that I'm interested in to see how maybe it gets played with, particularly like translated into a language like English that isn't gendered, because it's so I'm very intrigued by those kinds of things. Now, since reading the Sphinx, I'm very intrigued by that because I think the Sphinx really made me think about nuances that get lost in translation or can be lost in translation because of the lack of a gendered language in English, particularly.
Yeah. And you'll see when you get to chapter 4, it says victim is always feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested to see how she plays with that.
Yeah. I've already marked this up a great deal because there are so many things that are standing out to me, but I'm very excited to read this. I also started the Iliad Crest like 2 weeks ago. So I'm reading 2 of her many works at the same time.
I've only read the Iliad Crest and I did really enjoy it. It's not like a favorite book, but I really enjoyed the way she writes that story, the atmosphere she sets up, the language in general. So it made me very intrigued with her as an author. So yeah.
I'm enjoying this writing a great deal. Like even when she's describing what it means or feels like to her to be a runner. Can I just read it?
Yeah.
Okay. She says, in every runner, there should be a mind that runs. The goal is pleasure. The mind's challenge consists of staying in place, of the breathing, of the panting, of the knee, of the hand, of the sweat. If it goes elsewhere, it loses. If it wanders off, it loses even more. The mind's challenge is to be the body. If it aspires to it, if it achieves it, the mind then becomes the accomplice. And there, from that complicity, the detour that moves the mind and body away from boredom emerges. The detour is the pleasure, the goal. I like her.
I'm excited to get to it.
Yeah.
My enormous pile of books I need to get to.
Yep. What do you got?
Instead of reading from there, I read a book that's like 70 years old. So I picked up another Barbara Pym, and I just started it last night. I'm like 4 chapters in, and that is Jane and Prudence, which I think I picked this up in Boston at the Brattle, actually. So this is the story of Jane and Prudence. They went to school together in the sense that I think Jane was like Prudence's teacher in some way or instructor in some way. So they have a relationship. And they're a little older in life. Jane is married to I don't ever know what to call them, some sort of priest, pastor, vicar. I don't know the differences between all these things, but anyway.
Me neither.
Someone like that. And Prudence is like a secretary to this doctor who writes these, like, I think he does like economic books, like doctor of economics or something like that. Anyway, doesn't matter. So like Prudence is, like a career woman. She's not married. She lives alone. And Jane is the married traditional pastor wife, all this. And we just sort of set up that they know each other, and we're looking at both of their lives here. And I'm not sure exactly where we're going, but so far I'm enjoying the writing again, because I just think that Barbara Pym has this really great way of injecting like the littlest amount of humor into stuff, into what was an otherwise kind of mundane story. Like it's just a story about the church ladies and this and that, and there is this little thread of humor, this little thread of commentary in it. And it's just like a really lovely relaxing kind of experience to read a Barbara Pym book. And when we get to the end and you see what I'm recommending, it's why I need to read Barbara Pym, because I need that lovely little relaxing experience, because the other book I read was stressful. But I will kind of read you the flap here a little bit, just so we all kind of know where we're going with Jane and Prudence. So we have it's a friendship between two women, one the less than perfect clergyman's wife, the other younger and unmarried. So Jane is the older, and she is one of her excellent women. You know, these women that sort of do everything in the town and are very integrated with the church and all that. So she's bright, amused by village life, given to quoting John Donne, absent-mindedly inappropriate in her choices of clothes, as well as her chance remarks. She possesses those very qualities, wry humor and a curiosity for gossip, that draw us into Pym's stories. Her friend Prudence is too elegant to be considered a spinster and too well educated to consider herself a mere working girl. She keeps herself occupied looking after the humdrum side of the academic Dr. Grampion's books. She also carries on discreet romantic affairs in a half-hearted search for a husband. When Jane moves to a new parish in the country with her husband and encounters Fabian Driver, she believes she has found the perfect man for her unattached friend, but Fabian has been thriving in his role as the handsome bereaved widower, and his pursuit of Prudence is an awkward combination of reluctance and ardor, which satisfies nobody. So they're just fun sort of stories of manners and people, and it's just I just always find, well, this is my second Pym, and I once again find Pym sort of a breath of fresh air in some ways, and there is a bit of social commentary. We meet Jane and Prudence. They're at some dinner thing for their old school, and like the headmistress or whatever is going through everybody, and they're like, oh, this person's married to a clergyman, and this person's married to the vicar, and this person's, oh, and Sally's doing this. And then she's like, oh, and Prudence is doing this too. And Prudence has to remind her that she's, no, I'm not married. I work for this guy. I do these things. I have my own life. And they're like, oh, but you're still young at 29. You can find a husband. She's like, I don't really know if I even want a husband. I've been living alone so long. I mean, think about it's like 1950s ish, and she's like, "I've been living alone so long, I don't know if I even want. I don't know what I would do with one."
Exactly.
And I'm like laughing because it's like 1953. This is written. We're post-war England, so you're going to see like hints to austerity and rationing still. So there are those little bits of commentary on the times and things and society at the times. And I just enjoy. They're just non-serious, and they're kind of but they have enough meat to them that they're interesting, and her writing's just refreshing, so I enjoy it.
I did enjoy that one Pym that I read last year, the same one that you read.
Excellent Women.
Because it was kind of funny,
it's kind of funny.
It kind of read like a play to me. I don't know why, but it kind of read like a play, but I enjoyed it. It was nice. It was light.
They would make
had a little something to say.
They would make great so I'm trying to say. What am I trying to say? They would make great little mini series or little shows. Like if you just did like a Barbara Pym collection and you adapted them into like a bunch of, I think they would do really well.
Yes.
They're so dialogue heavy, they're so character heavy, like they have nice little tight little plots, and it would be great.
Yeah.
And we need those kinds of books.
Yeah. You just made me think of the TikTok meme when you're saying, I'm like, you know what? Hell yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah. Ooh. So we are here to talk about something that I think gets talked about quite a bit and that got brought up recently. Naomi and I seem to frequent different avenues of the booktube world, but you came across a video where somebody was asking about essentially, do classics even matter anymore? Do we need them? Do we need to read them? Right. I think it's a topic, a conversation that comes up often. I think we've talked a lot about classics on the channel in general and their merits or lack thereof.
And expanding them. We've had that conversation too.
Yeah. So we thought we'd kind of circle back to this because it's just like a nice conversation. And, Naomi's unwell and I'm tired and it's just a good chit chatty kind of video. So kind of podcast episode. So if you guys have thoughts on this as well, drop them in the comments, and nice little discourse. Yeah. That's what we're doing today. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So the original video that was posted, he's someone I've never heard of before. Is it Kevin Toll? He does these little, basically these videos where he asks a question, just trying to spur some conversation. And Steve Donahue did a response video to his video about whether or not he thinks classics are still relevant. So I am a reader who has not read a lot of classics. I've read some, but I have not read many. And I often get confused about like what a classic is and what's the actual like definition. I think some people feel the same way. Like, what does it actually mean for a book to become a classic? Like, what are the parameters that you have to like set to have a book meet classic status? What do you think about Steve's response?
The amount that I can stomach through. Yeah. Sorry. I'll be kind. I mean, I think that in general, okay, I think his point about the classics to him, it means like, Euripides and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And yes, there is that definition of the classics. And I think that's more of a very, very, very traditional academic approach to the word, to the classics. But I think when we're talking more like colloquially, like just as people out in the world,
people who are not trying to obtain a degree in the classics, because he did kind of make mention of that, right?
Yeah, we're not academics. We're just readers. I think classics is a lot broader. I think it's any book that is of an age, and I think that age is obviously going to keep moving because time keeps moving, and is still read. There's the core group of classics that are the things that we are reading still in school, be it high school or college. You've got your Garza, you've got your Dickens, you've got all these, white men.
Yeah.
And you do have some women coming in, but I think classics can be a much broader term than just being your Dickens, your Goethe, your Tolstoy's, your whatever.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, do they have any merit? I'm a firm believer that I think that people should still be reading classic lit. I mean, if there are books that we are still teaching and looking at and reading, 100 years, 50 years, 200 years later, I think that there's a reason.
For sure.
Whether you like them or not is like a separate bucket of conversation, but I think there's a reason we're reading them. And I think a lot of it comes down to the idea of shared human experience and things that are common amongst everybody, any human being that's living on this earth. And I think that reading classics, whether you're reading Euripides or you're reading the Iliad or you're reading Pride and Prejudice, you're reaching back into time and realizing that we're all connected. We are all humans, right? We all go through the same things. There is a shared human experience across time and millennia. And some of these stories just continue to resonate for whatever reason. I think Steve then went into a whole diatribe about you can't say it's just about like the human experience or whatever, which it's got to also be about the book. But I think if the book is good, it's well written, it has substance, it's thematically interesting, it's written well, it has great character development, it has a good arc, it has all these things that from a literary perspective that you are looking for, and it has its messaging, its themes hit on those shared human experiences, it could be a classic. Will it? Definitely. No. Will things fall in and out? Yes. But to be dismissive of that element of the human experience, I think is a little bit I'm trying to pick my words
I mean,
nicely here, but I think it's a little
I agree.
almost, it's snobbish almost to be like, well, it's also got to be about the literature because yes, of course it does. Of course it does. You're not just going to have some like shit book
Right.
like around 150 years later that we're talking about. So like, I think it's sort of stupid to dismiss people that say, what was the phrasing that he used? But basically about like shared human experience.
Yeah, like doesn't relate to me. Like I'm looking at it trying to see if it reminds me of like my friend from high school,
But I
But
think it
like
helps you with empathy, which I think is something
mhm,
that we're in desperate need of, particularly today. I think that the same with reading history, and reading broadly in history,
yeah,
and not just about like my white experience is what how I'll say. Reading like from Zinn, reading from, Black and Indigenous historians, reading from classics from different, if we're going to move out of nonfiction, reading classics from different places,
yes,
different cultures, different everything. One, you can see that knowing that there's this shared human experience that breaks time, gender, race, creed, whatever. We're all dealing with death. We're all dealing with why are we here. We're all dealing with families, motherhood, childhood, mother-daughter
you
bonds.
got
There's all these
birth,
things that are
death, love, trauma, war. Like these are
there are,
things that span across the entire world, no matter what the culture.
and there's thousands of books written on these things, but certain
Right,
ones, for whatever reason, resonate and continue to do so. And I
right.
think that by reading reading broadly and including in that broadness, um, going back in time and reading the things that have stood the test of time and going out into the world, I think you will generate more empathy. I think reading is a huge piece of having empathy, and creating it. I don't know if that's something that everybody is born with. I think some people are born with a deep well of empathy, and I think there's a lot of other people that maybe need to learn it. And this
Absolutely.
is a way to learn it.
It is a way for us to have, or rather to build a shared connection, human to
Mhm.
human. It is a way to have a shared understanding. It is a
Mhm.
way for us to feel less lonely as
Mhm.
humans on this earth. So I think it does a lot. So yeah, I was a little like when he like kind of poo-pooed that, I was like, but that doesn't matter for
It
like
matters a
us
lot.
individual humans to connect with one another. I think we can't just like shoo that away as something that's like trivial or
It's not.
as he put it, childish. I do think that's
Yeah,
important.
I think that was a rather elitist response from him, and I didn't
Yeah,
really
like
appreciate it.
if anything is going to help us to have and to build a deeper human connection with one another, how can we just shoo that away?
Well, I think like so I let's just take like the idea of alienation, right? I think this idea of feeling alienated can come from a lot of different things.
Yeah,
Come from um just being different because you like just are like the weird kid. It could come
right.
because you're queer. It can come because you're black or you're native or you're a
Poor.
woman or you're poor, or there's so many ways that you can feel
Right.
alienated. And you can read all kinds of different stories about alienation, and maybe you experienced one kind of alienation in your own life growing up, a moment in your life, whatever, but it's not this one, right? I'm
Right.
not queer, right? But I
Right.
can read a story about somebody and watching somebody go through a series of emotions or whatever, or go through an experience. There, you have like that applied like you can apply your own experience onto that and go, oh my god, now I have a greater understanding of what this other human being is going through, and boom, you
Right.
have empathy, right? And it's
Exactly.
not always about like putting it on you, like not I'm not you're not putting it over on top of and masking. It is being able to draw those connections and making those dots and connecting those dots, I mean, and being like, yeah, okay, this is a shared experience that I've had, like
Right.
this experience of alienation for different reasons, but I've experienced this and I felt really shitty. So
Yeah.
maybe this person also feels very shitty, and maybe they don't deserve to feel very shitty because I didn't deserve to feel very shitty for this other thing that
Exactly.
was outside of my control. And now you're developing that empathy is blossoming, right? That
Yeah.
ability to be a kinder, better person is
Right.
blossoming, and it's all through a story, right?
Right. It's that deeper understanding.
Yeah. And you don't just get that from classics. I mean, that's not something that's just a
Right.
classic.
Right.
But there's a
Absolutely.
reason why these things stay, and it's because they hit on those universal kind of feelings
Yeah. Yeah.
or experiences or
Right.
lessons that we need to learn.
Right. And on top of that, not all, but a good number of the quote unquote classics are very well written. Again,
Mhm.
not all, but a good number
But
of them.
I think they kinda have to be. I think it's silly to
Yeah.
be like, "Let's talk about how the book's actually written." You're like, "Yeah, I mean, if the book was shit, it would be shit, and we wouldn't be talking about it." Like,
Right.
but also things change, like, I wish I remember who it was. There was somebody who was talking about this book that they have that's, like, 1,000 classics or something like that, and
Mm.
in the very back, there's this discussion, or maybe it was in the introduction, doesn't matter, somewhere on the periphery of this book. They were talking about the idea of a classic and
Uh-huh.
some of the books that have come in and out of, a circulation as a classic. And so just even being a classic is a very fluid thing. So what's a classic
Yes.
today by a generation or two may no longer be a classic. It may be something else. But a classic also doesn't mean that that book was incredibly popular at the time it was written. It's just for some
Like
reason
Gatsby.
continues to resonate, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we continue to go back to it. For some reason, we keep going back to this book for a few generations, many generations. If we're thinking about something like Homer, you're going through Dante, you're going through that for a really long time. Um, but there's things
Right.
that just they're well written and themes resonate. They're human books. That's my thought process on it. And I think that you do need to read them.
Yeah.
Do you need to read them all? Do you need to read them all the time? Does everybody absolutely have to? No, do whatever you want. I don't care. I'm not your mother. But I think that if you are somebody who is like, I really want to have this, I want to be, if you're striving for any form of well read, which I don't really like that phrase, but if you're
Yeah.
striving for anything that touches on that concept, I think it's important to have. Plus, there's a lot of referencing back. A
That's the other
lot of
thing,
people
right?
reference.
Yeah.
There's a lot of harkening back to other stories.
Absolutely. Because a lot of our modern writers have studied these older writers, and I don't know if I should say it that it's influenced their work, but maybe that is the right thing to say. But like, they studied those works too, and those older works have left an impression on these newer writers' works. And so I know there's a lot of um I don't know if comparison, but like, I know that Morrison studied Faulkner. So
Mhm.
when you're reading some of her work, and if you read Faulkner, you can pick up on
Yeah.
certain things that feel very familiar between their works. And you can say that about almost any writer who studied some of the older works. Some of those influences, are seeped into those writings. I
Yeah, but
think,
there's only so many stories too.
right. That's true too. That's true
Mhm.
too. Who was it? It's left me my brain. I've got brain fog. There was some book. What's the book you hate? Moby Dick.
Oh, you're talking about no, I do have a loathing for Moby Dick, I
Yeah.
think mostly because I was forced to read it in high school, but do you mean Demon Copperhead?
No, I really mean
Yeah.
Moby Dick. There is some book, and I can't remember now because my brain is foggy, but maybe it'll come to me. But yeah, and sometimes, I want to read the older works specifically because I know that some of the writers that I enjoy are pulling from those older writers too, and I would
Yeah.
like to get and understand and see the connection when I'm reading their works. But that might not be important to everybody, but like, sometimes I'm very curious about that, and I want to be able to pick up on it.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
intertextuality. Like, books talk to each other.
Yeah.
Books harken back to each other, and I think it can, if you wanted to, add to your reading experience w when you start to be able to see those connections between things.
Right.
Um, when you start to be able to be reading and you're like, "Oh, wait, that sounds kind of familiar." And then you're thinking and you're like, "Oh, yeah, that's so we're having this like river Styx kind of moment. Oh, are we like
Yeah.
going into some sort of heaven and hell thing?" Like, so there's things that you can start to tease out of a really well-written story,
Mhm.
um, and start to connect with it on a deeper level than just maybe like the really interesting characters or the compelling plot. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, maybe that's a big difference between like a really lit ficky kind of book, and a more of a popcorn book. You know,
Right.
I mean, I'm not to say that popcorn books don't also do any of this stuff, but maybe, there are some books that are written with that, like intentionally to have that depth and that ability for you to really sit with it and read it multiple times and pick up on new things and see how they connect to each other. Um, I mean, there's some authors that I think do that within their own works. I think Han Kang's newest book, I think We Do Not Part, takes her other 3 books that have been translated into English
Uh-huh.
and really, like, you put them in a blender and you come up with We Do Not Part and the best I know Greek lessons about Greek lessons. I think Greek lessons is on its own, but you really
Uh-huh.
get this, like, strangeness of the vegetarian and
Mhm.
the brutality from human acts and the, like, poetic, um, imagery and language from the White Book, and it creates this whole new story that touches on things that if you've read all of her books, you're familiar with.
Right.
Um, and it creates this deeper reading experience. And that can happen within an author's canon, but it can happen even more broadly than that.
Yeah. I think about Victor Laval, and I've read 3 of his books, maybe 4, which I deeply enjoyed. But I
Mhm.
also know that he studied Lovecraft, and I did buy some Lovecraft books a few years back, and I bet that if I read those Lovecraft books and then reread Laval's books, I would look at them in a different way, and I could probably see more clearly how he took from Lovecraft and like really made it his own in his stories. So
Yeah.
sometimes when I learn of an author that I enjoy who talks about a particular author that they studied, sometimes I do want to go back and read said author so that I can read that new author's books again to kind of like see what I can pick from it. So I can see like how they've transformed what they study into their own vision of those older authors.
I mean, think about Dickens and Donna Tartt. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much Dickens in her writing, and she has talked about in the several interviews that I can find from her deep love of Dickens. And you can see how that thread pulls into her narrative. And you can see how, as she develops as an author, from each of her 3 books, you can see how much of an influence like the growth of that influence on her writing, and the way that her writing becomes richer and deeper, and
Yeah.
her characters can become much more interesting, and her worlds are bigger, and there's just more complex themes and things, and they're really deeply rooted in somebody like Dickens, and like I mean, to could you read um, Tart without having any familiarity with Dickens? Of course. But I
Sure.
think when you have even a little bit of familiarity, you pick up one Dickens, you get this taste of how he wrote and
Right.
what his character work looked like and the worlds he built and the complexities of his stories. And then you go back and you read A Little Friend or something like that, and you can
Mhm.
see how that influences her. And I think that if it's something you care about and if you find that interesting, it would behooves us to continue to read the classics. But I
Yeah.
still think reading the classics is much like reading about history and learning about
Mhm.
history, is that it will help us to be better people, to have more empathy, and to maybe, hopefully, try not to repeat the past over and over and over again. But we are doomed
Right.
to keep repeating it over and over again,
Clearly. Clearly.
unfortunately. Um, but yeah, and we talked about this with the Bible. Like, I would love if somebody did or put together, like a reading the Bible for literature kind of thing,
Steve
not
Donahue did.
mm, somebody else. Somebody else. Sorry
I just
for
had to
I
say it. I had to say it.
we all have different likes and dislikes and people we can and can't watch. And unfortunately, I don't understand the appeal of Steve. But I do respect and appreciate his intelligence and his knowledge and his
he's got great depth, of literature,
I can't watch the man, but somebody else. I can't also do the other guy with the big eyes that just stares at you. The British guy, he does that classic.
Oh, Ian,
that you did the.
Hardcore literature guy. Yeah,
hardcore
right?
literature. I can't have something about the way he like deeply stares into you through the camera. I feel like I feel like I want to be like, is me, or is there somebody behind? Like what?
Right.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
We all have different likes and different dislikes.
Exactly.
But
yeah,
I think that there's stuff like that that's important to see. Like I think I would understand Hardy more if I understood more of the biblical references that are in like a
about the Grapes of Wrath. When I was reading the Grapes of Wrath, I was like, I wish I really knew the Bible, because I know I'm not picking up on biblical references in this book. I'm not getting it all. I knew that.
And it's not to say that you didn't enjoy it. Right?
Right, because you know that I did. I deeply enjoyed it, but I also knew that I was missing the biblical part of it. And I was like, reading that book actually made me want to read the Bible so that I could pick up on that stuff in other works.
I think if Jesus came home and found me reading the Bible, he would be very concerned. He'd be like, what?
Well, and because I think that sometimes in the Bible in particular, I'll just speak for myself, it seems very daunting and very boring, but they really are just stories.
I mean, some of the stories are really compelling, and I remember that from Bible camp. I remember really enjoying and I've read a decent amount of the Bible, and I've blanked a lot of it out for my Bible camp years. But yeah, we can have a deconstructing your faith conversation later. But
look, I never went to Bible camp, so sorry, I don't know.
I'm just glad I didn't go to Bible college, because I almost did that, and then who knows where I would have been.
Wow.
So it was close.
That wasn't on my bingo card for you.
You didn't know that? Yeah, little close. It was close. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It was like number 3, I think, because it would have cost. I had a large scholarship.
Wow. So let me ask this, because it seems like so many grown-ups hate the classics, and it seems to have stemmed from being forced to read them in high school. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the approach and the types of classics chosen in high school are just too traumatizing for high school students, in such a way that it basically makes us like turn away? I actually liked basically everything I read in high school. I enjoyed it, but I don't know, I'm trying to figure out what is it that really turns adults off from classics from their high school experiences. Was it the type of classic that was chosen? Was it the way in that the discussions were had? Was it I don't know what it is, but you hear this all the time. It's like, oh, I had to read that in high school and I hated it. So there's something that could be improved during those high school years of reading the classics that wouldn't turn off future adults from reading them ever again.
Well, first I'd say I didn't go to public school, so I don't know if my experience is similar to what the large majority of people in the U.S. experienced doing literature. So I think that's probably an important caveat here. So I learned when I was in high school, probably, because I think I read this in middle school. I was forced to read this book, Mara, Daughter of the Nile, when I was in middle school, I think. And I just happened to pick it up maybe middle of high school. And I absolutely loved it. And I was like, that's the first time I realized that when you're forced to read something, you have a very different experience with it than when you are picking it up of your own accord and just coming to it kind of almost like when you're ready as a reader. So I think that's just generally sort of part. I think a lot of people don't like to do things that they're forced to
That's
do.
probably true too. Yeah.
Like my thing with Moby Dick is I think I do need to reread it because I also want to read this. There's like an Ahab's wife or something. There's a book about there's a spin-off sort of book. But I will smacking my mic. I will read Moby Dick at some point because I find Melville quotes in things and the language is so beautiful that now as an adult reader, I'm thinking, God damn, is it better than that?
Yeah.
But I remember being younger and reading it in high school and going like, oh my God, this book is pointless. But I think maybe there's also themes that you don't identify with, right? Like
Right.
reading certain things when you're younger that are a much more adult themes, like, and
Yeah.
like not like sex, like a grown-up themes where you haven't had those life experiences. It can be hard to connect or more difficult to connect with those books
Right.
because you don't care. You're a kid, right? Like that's not a worry of mine.
Right. Exactly.
I
Also, isn't
always
Moby Dick another one of those books that was not very popular until like way past the author's death?
Probably. I think he was
Yeah.
more known for some of his other works,
Yeah.
that I never hear about. I only hear about Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think that, like, I think I've said this before to other people that I know that are teachers, and I wonder, like, why can't you guys pair up things? Like, why can't you read some classic? Like, I don't know. I can't think of a pairing right now, but like, say you're
Like
reading
Passing in the
a
Vanishing Half.
yeah, like or just read like something more contemporary with something that is older so
Yeah.
you can one see how they talk to each other.
Right.
And then also I think there is a bit of a language. I mean it's somebody for my House of Mirth read along for March and February no, January and February said that they are reading it, but the language is a little old-timey and
Huh.
it's it was hard for them to, like, read it, but they're I think they switched to, like, audiobook or something, and it was a little bit more approachable, and I get that because I think that there's a lot of people that stumble on the way the language is in some of the older books because it's not how we talk today, it's not how we write today, it's not how we communicate, so there is a little bit of a learning curve on that, right? But, I mean, I said, like, I would say with that particular comment around Edith Wharton, I was a little bit it took me a second to, like, wrap my head around it because, like, to me, that doesn't feel old-timey, but that's probably because I've also read so much
Right.
of other things, right? So, like, then it's reframing that understanding. So I think that if you gave kids a balance and you really got them to, like, read something maybe that's more approachable, Vanishing Half, or something that's not that passing isn't approachable, but something maybe like that, it would be more compelling, but I don't think you have a lot of I don't think in the public school system, you have a lot of leeway for that. I think that it's a
Probably
very
not.
and that's where I was like, a caveat, I didn't go to public school, so I had a very different experience in general being educated. It was a little bit more like my high school was a little bit more like a college light kind of experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think what I didn't like in particular wasn't the books, it was all the writing, and I had a very essay-heavy school. I mean, every Monday at the end of and they don't do this anymore, which pisses me off. As an old lady, I'm like, "You bitches." Anyway, um, the last period of every day was, like, an hour long, 55 minutes, whatever, and every Monday, the entire school from 6th grade to senior year would sit somewhere, and they would spend that hour writing in a blue book an essay. We were all
Yeah.
given the same essay topic, and you wrote an essay. There was a lot. It was heavy writing, and
Yeah.
I was not a good. I was not a good writer. I didn't really know how to spell anything. I think in all honesty, this ADHD that every teacher and counselor friend of mine has diagnosed me with, and I think I have a bit of dyslexia. I think there were learning disabilities that people were ignoring. But anyway,
Oh.
so like I have a lot of like fear and shame and frustration. And I think that for me was what was so difficult about English class and literature class. It wasn't the reading, it wasn't the like discussing. That stuff was fun. It was the heavy focus on essays and writing and short answer. All of that stuff was very hard for me, and that made me personally frustrated. But I don't know. Maybe everybody just kind of has a different thing when it comes to it. Maybe some of it's that old-timey language. Maybe some of it is a frustration around writing. Maybe some of it's just you want to read something fresh and new. And also there's a lot of dead white guys. I mean, you really got to spice it up. I mean, the dead white guys have some bangers, and then there's other books that are interesting to read.
Right.
I mean, found we read like some Richard Wright. I think we read Black Boy. We read some other like Harlem Renaissance-y writers in high school at some point, but it wasn't until I went to college and took like a Harlem Renaissance course that I really delved into like that area of writing and found a whole new world of books, which are phenomenal, that aren't necessarily being taught in your average classroom. And they should be, because they're some fantastic books.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting conversation.
What do you think? But like, what do you think is the frustration? I've just prattled on for too long while you sniffled. So
I know, right? Now I can't breathe. I definitely think a lot of people are not into reading quote unquote old ass books. I mean, I've heard and seen that sentiment enough to know that is a fact for many readers. It's like, this is too old. I actually don't care about any of this. I'm not interested. I also think that there is a lot of distraction with the new and shiny stories, and so the classes just seem like that's old stuff. I'm all about what's happening now with the new releases. And I also think that, again, people that were forced to read classes in high school are just turned off from them, know? And maybe it is just that being forced to do it, where you're so unhappy about being forced to do something that you can't really fully enjoy what you're being forced to read. And that does carry over into adulthood. And so someone may very well enjoy quite a few of the classics, but they can't get past that feeling of being forced to read something when they were in high school. That kind of just like sticks with you. And maybe in some cases, maybe it was boring, right? Like I think that you need to also be under a really vibrant, interesting teacher who's teaching the classics to like help you engage with the text. It's not just all on the student. Like, the teacher has a lot of work to do there to help you to understand what's going on in that text and to make it come alive for you. And if you just had an English teacher who was just kind of like, we're just reading chapters, whatever the day, and, ask some questions, like, maybe that's not enough for a lot of readers. You need a little bit more to get that student excited about reading those older works. And so, when you weren't taught to learn how to enjoy those classics, it probably is pretty hard to like figure that out on your own as an adult. And it certainly doesn't seem exciting to do on your own. It certainly doesn't seem like a journey anyone wants to take on as an adult, because it was so effing miserable when they were in high school. So I think that plays a lot into it as well. And I don't know, sometimes it takes like a certain class of becoming like popular again, online, for someone to even be willing to give it a chance,
Yeah. And I think that kids today have a bit more of an advantage than we did, just simply with the amount of audiobooks that they have.
Oh, for
like, we
sure.
didn't really have that. And I will say this. If there are classics that you need to read, if there's some youngin that's listening to this and you've got to read The Great Expectations or whatever, there's no the in there. It's just Great Expectations. I would, because I remember just absolutely, I don't like Dickens. Okay. Because of high school. And I have my dislike of Dickens has lasted into my 40s. And I will read Bleak House, because I feel like it's just that. It's that, like, I had such a rough time trying to get through Great Expectations. Like when I read my first Hemingway, I fell in love, right? I like short, quippy, to the point, like a little book.
Yeah.
Talk about something, a little book that can say a lot in very succinctly will get me every time. I love it. I love beautiful language too. I love all these other things. But like like I have a deep love of something like Passing or Hemingway, things like just like that is their kind of writing. So reading Dickens, who is like paid by the word, torture for young Alyssa, right? Like if I'm like, just get to the point. You don't need to say all this. Is too much. Like I would, if I had an audiobook, maybe I would have had a different experience because I could have put on a pair of headphones and maybe I would have been able to fall into the world a little bit more. And maybe I would have found it easier. And I mean, you know me, I love my audiobooks. I think that, you know, before we had writing, all stories were oral. And I think a really good story will play really well out loud. I think sometimes it can help you get into a story, especially if you listen along with the text. Especially a difficult story, hard books. I think it's sometimes easier for me to listen and read along, and then I really get in there and understand it. And we didn't have that option, right? You could just stare at a page in your mass market paperback of Dickens that has font the size of like a pinprick, and you're trying to read it, you know, like, and you can see how I've been remembering sitting in my little bedroom, just like trying. And it's, you know, it is sort of torturous to do that. But then there's other things like you could have read, like A Christmas Carol is fantastic, right? And there's lessons and stuff in there. There's stories. I think a lot of authors have stories like that are a little bit more approachable, that are a little bit more age appropriate, maybe.
Right.
And maybe we don't need to try to shove certain ones. Maybe we just need to look at the canon in our schools.
Right.
And
That's
make
what
some
I'm saying.
adjustments.
Like the choices that the choice of book that they choose for the students to read, maybe that's the problem. You know, maybe that's the problem. Like you're saying, perhaps, I don't know, maybe they should have been reading the Christmas Story instead, because it is more approachable. It's easier to digest. So I feel like sometimes whatever books they've selected for, you know, English 12 in high school, like those are part of the same books on the list like for decades. And I wonder how often they revisit. And I'm not a teacher, I don't know. And I know that every school district is different, right? So it's not even like every school district across the board is like doing the same thing. So like maybe one school district is more up on it, and maybe they are revisiting those lists, you know, every couple of years to see if it can be refreshed. But maybe another school district, it's been the same way for like 50 effing years, you know. So accessibility does matter too, you know, especially if you really want your students to get something out of it and not traumatize them, you know, going forward in the adulthood, you know.
I will read Bleak House though, because I will eventually read Bleak House and Moby Dick, because I'm convinced, at least with Dickens, that
Oh,
that was weird. I'm convinced, at least with Dickens, that it is like that sort of classroom trauma that is keeping me from reading him. But then I also think there's things like, generally the Victorians are kind of stodgy, but you can find a fun one. I think if you read like Lady Audley's Secret, and it's like really propulsive, sort of thrillery mystery, like that would be interesting, and you can talk about stuff. And I don't know if, like, what do you want to get? Like, you want to teach kids to talk? Like, what are we trying to teach them?
like what's the point?
We're trying to teach them how to look at literature, how to have that literacy. And literacy isn't just reading. Literacy is being able to look at something, interpret it, find the deeper meaning, do that intertextuality, connect dots, find themes and symbolism.
Yeah, can you analyze it?
Yeah. And you could do that with some more exciting books. You could do that with Passing. You could do that with The Street. You could do that with, I mean, I can keep going through my list if I look up. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, you don't have to read the boring ones, or like what a kid would find boring, right?
It's very true. Yeah.
So
it's very interesting. The classics conversation is very, very interesting. I found this what is this what university is this? This is Minnesota State University.
Mm-hmm.
And this is their a suggested reading guide to immerse oneself in the classics, and it's broken down into 5 categories: fiction, nonfiction, plays and poetry, cult classics, and children's classics. And the classic fiction is separated into 2 subpages: classic fiction to 1899 and modern classic fiction from 1900. So I think that's interesting too. I think many of us are much more willing to read modern classics versus the straight up classics. And that's fine, but I do think that high school English trauma plays a part in many of adult readers being completely turned off from, the classics. So, but and look, I'm sure there are some classics that are absolutely boring, just god awful boring, but there are also some classics that are really moving and interesting and fun. But it's your thought, I guess, of like sifting through to get to the fun ones, sifting through to get to the ones that don't bore me to death, sifting through to get to the ones that don't make me feel like I can't understand a thing on the page. And I think that work is also a turn off.
Well, I also wonder if we have a lot of, I mean, I'm just going to say, I don't really understand public school because I didn't go, and I definitely don't understand public school as it stands today because I don't have children.
Yeah.
So, but like, I don't know how much familiarity a lot of our teachers even have with some of these things, right? So like, you don't always, like, if you're being given like, this is what we need to cover. I mean, obviously at some point, if you're doing this after over years, you're going to have some familiarity with the things that you're covering, but I don't know if it's like everywhere you go, you have an English lit teacher who is absolutely in love with the things that they're teaching, right? They themselves may also be teaching things that they don't care about, but perhaps if they were given the freedom to put in certain other things that could cover the same kinds of themes, and get the same sorts of outcomes, it would be a more engaging and exciting experience for both. And maybe there wouldn't be, what I mean? Like,
that's a good point.
If you are teaching Hawthorne and you find Hawthorne boring, how are you going to make your kids excited to read the Scarlet Letter?
Excellent point. I did love that book in school. I really did.
But like, could you read the Scarlet Letter and also read something else that's kind of similar, that's more hip, modern, and like attractive to your students to read, and maybe then they can see, like, it might help them understand the Hawthorne better, to read those two things in tandem.
You're so right. Because, Miss Green, I think I read the Scarlet Letter either 10th or 11th grade. My English teacher, Miss Green, she was like a hippy dippy teacher, loved her. And she was just very theatrical. And just one of those people where it's like, you just knew that she just loved reading. And she just made every book so exciting. So it was definitely a privilege being in her class. And she made that book come alive for us. But that's not every English teacher.
No, I mean, Miss Jackson in 10th grade, I love Miss Jackson. She was phenomenal. Did I have Miss Jackson in 10th grade? No, I had somebody terrible in 10th grade. Miss Jackson, I have Miss Jackson in 9th grade, and then I think I may have had her again in junior year. And I think she was one of my advisors too, because I loved her so much. May she rest in peace. She was phenomenal. And she created we read things in her classes that when I talk about things that I read, like when we had the Bible as a section of our coursework, and we were reading out sections of the Bible and then talking about, and then they looped back in with books that we were reading, that was phenomenal. And that is not something in a secular school
Yeah.
Well, maybe now, I don't know what's going on anymore, but in a secular school, you would do, right? So we read different, like, we read Cry the Beloved Country in her class. I'm trying to think of other things. We read, like, books. We read Moby Dick, but, like, we read things that weren't always typical. There was always this little spin, and there was a reason for it, and it exposed you to different things. Like, I know about South African apartheid because we read Cry the Beloved Country.
Right.
Not because I knew anything about anybody.
Right.
Because why would we know about, we're kids in America in, like, the 90s. We didn't talk globally like we talk globally now, right? So,
Exactly.
I think it's interesting that, like, I think sometimes those English teachers, and I had one really great uh, history teacher that I think those are the people. There's certain teachers that really stick with you, and it's like not like it's not like your biology teacher, like,
Right.
it's just people that make you that spark that creative thought, or make you like something that you didn't like before. Like, Dr. Klein made me actually like history because of the way he taught it, and he taught it like a professor. I think he got fired because of how much he taught it like a professor. But like, we played this game of diplomacy. We did all these things. It was interesting. He made you interested in, like, how did World War II? What was it? We did modern European history with him, and it was fascinating going through World War I, World War II, seeing how things went on and all that. And I think it does our kids a disservice to not allow educators who love to educate our kids
Right.
in an engaging manner, that, like, using your skill set, right? To tie, like, one hand behind their back and say they have to do X, Y, and Z does people a disservice, because I
Yeah,
think
I
that
agree.
teaching, well, this is taking a turn, but
I
I
know
do think that
stifling teachers does not help the students.
no, and I think teaching to, like, certain tests and certain rubrics, I don't like, sure, so you can pass the test, but, like, can you read? Can you analyze? Can you think for yourself? Have you sparked something inside the student that makes them want to learn and be curious and engage in their world? Or are you just kind of making a cog in a wheel?
Yeah. Yeah, because I know, like, my grandson's in seventh school, but, like, they've been analyzing books for a few years now. I mean,
Mhm.
it's getting deeper now, but, like, they've been doing that for a few years already, you know?
And they should. And, like, isn't, like, well, I also think there's been, like, a push away from the humanities in a lot of ways and into STEM, um and, like, not to say that STEM isn't, like, valuable, but I think they're both very valuable, and you need a good balance
Yes.
of it.
Yes.
Um yeah, and I mean, and then I also think about somebody like, because I'm reading that Edith Wharton autobiography, and obviously it's a very Edith Wharton year for me, so everyone's
Right.
gonna
Yes.
get tired of her. But I'm reading her. So she, no real formal education, right? She's a woman born in the mid to late 1800s, right? So she has no formal education, but she's probably better educated than your average person coming out of high school today, right? Or
Yeah.
college today. But well, one, that's because she had wealth and privilege, but also because you know, there is this self-educating, this reading, this, how do you get to be a well-rounded, well-educated person without school? You have to read a lot, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
You have
Yeah.
to, like, Goodwill Hunting yourself, right? And
That is
you
true.
can't do that if we kill people's love of reading.
Yeah. I mean, that is absolutely true. While my grandfather on my father's side was an extremely educated man, PhD level, wrote books of historical nature. My father just went to high school, but
Mhm.
he is one of the smartest men I've ever known. But he was extremely well read. He read
Yeah.
a lot, and you've seen the books.
Mhm.
He's read everything. I mean, when I look at some of those boxes of his books, I'm like, what would make you even want to pick this up? He read everything. he was extremely learned, self-learner on his own.
There's a reason why when you want to dominate over a group of people, you keep them illiterate. Like,
Absolutely.
reading is hugely important. And to answer our question for the episode of do we need classics? I think we do. I think that you need that to be able to hook into the thread of humanity through time. I think you
'Cause it is
need
history.
classics.
Yeah, it's
It's part of
history.
our history. Um, I listened to something somebody said in a video, and I think they said that, like, Stephen King said that or was it in this video that it was one of these videos that I watched today? I don't know, that, like, Stephen King said that fiction is truth wrapped in
Oh,
a lie or
and
something like
lies.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, and that's as much as, I don't enjoy Stephen King's writing, I do think that that's very accurate of a sentiment.
Right.
And I think there's a lot that we can learn from uh, reaching back into the past and
Yeah.
seeing how connected we all are, how learning all, I'm not going to keep rehashing what I've already said, but
Yeah.
I the short answer is yes, we need classics.
I
Do we
agree.
all have to read all of them? Are you still a reader? Does it make you any better or worse to have not read them or to have read them or whatever? But I think it's important, especially for our kids. And I think and you don't have to stick to the same old rubric. I think you can broaden the classics and you can make it more interesting.
Exactly.
And I think if you mix it
Exactly.
all up and you get interesting with it and you make those connections, I think it'll be more entertaining and engaging for kids.
Yeah.
But what do I know? I'm not a kid anymore and I don't have my own children. So
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Okay.
so Naomi is dying.
I'm dying. I can't breathe out of my nose, so it's hard to talk.
So I think that we need to get on to book recommendations, but I think
Yes.
that it would be really nice to hear everybody else's thoughts
Yeah.
in the comments on this, particularly like about teaching, about what might make it classics more approachable for others. And then, what would be your canon? Maybe that's an interesting question. Like, what would be your canon of
Right.
classics that you should read? I mean, I think that a lot of people really love the Odyssey. I don't think you can kick the Odyssey off of that. I think that is
Right.
something. I mean,
People
that's
do. Yeah.
super old, right? But like maybe you want to knock off, I don't know what. Like maybe you want to knock off Moby Dick and stick in something else, because
Maybe.
it's interesting. So I would
And
love to know
also
if
share with us your high school reading experiences with the classics.
yeah.
Were you fortunate enough to have a wonderful experience and fall in love with the classics? Or did you have a traumatic experience and it just turned you off forever from them? Let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing. I think it's like this weird thing that kind of ties us all together is that the classics tie us all together, right? Like we all had
Right.
some touch point with them.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so
I
let us
like it.
know all your
I
thoughts. I
like
think
it.
it's an interesting conversation. But we need to let Naomi go. So
I know.
we're going to move on
Recommendation
to book
time.
recommendations. Do you want to go and get it out of the way?
Yes, I'm
Or do you
gonna
need a
go and get it
moment?
out of the way. This is a reread for me. I read this book like 30 years ago. I was either like, I don't know, 18 or 19. And it's Disappearing Acts by Terry McMillan. And I vaguely remember reading this book and I really did. I enjoyed it, but I didn't pick up on much. And so reading this now 30 years later, I ugh, I can't even tell you how upset I was with this book. It's a good book, but so let me kind of just break down what's going on in this book. So Zora, who is a teacher and like a budding musician, meets this guy named Franklin, and he seems to be a good catch. He's gainfully employed. He seems nice. He's handsome, and they hit it off. And come to find out, he really struggles holding down a job, but also like it's also the time, right? Work isn't like just like at your beck and call for you to get a job as a Black man during this time. But he's also got a little issue with the drinking and the drugs. And so I'm reading this story and I'm seeing all of these red flags that Franklin has that I did not pick up on 30 years ago, obviously, because I'm basically still a teenager. And you know how like you're watching a scary movie and you're like, girl, don't go down there. You don't need to check that sound out. You don't need to do that. That's the feeling I had reading this book the whole time. Like, girl, don't keep dating him. Dump him now. This is the red flag where you need to let this thing go. But Zora was so accommodating and she was so understanding. And, you know, she's all about we can work through it together. Like, I'm here for you. And all I saw was this man, just really manipulating her, you know, making her feel like it was her job to, number one, to make him feel like a man, to lift him up, and to really help him figure out his problems. And I haven't been this frustrated with a book in a long time. The book is great, but these characters frustrated me deeply. And I was just like vehemently against them being together as a couple. And it's so funny when you read something when you're so young and then you revisit it like decades later and just like comparing those experiences, because I did not feel like this when I read this 30 years ago. But the anger I felt with this couple and the amount of times I had those don't go down there, girl moments was like astounding. But it's a short, well, it felt short. It's almost 400 pages, but it really didn't feel like it. It read kind of quickly to me, but man, revisiting this was something else. I think I viewed it 30 years ago as like a really beautiful love story, but like now it's just like, this is just full of red flags. And like, why are you not listening? Why are you doing this?
And that's why rereading books is great.
It was, but I was like, man, I need to get more of Terry McMillan's books. I've maybe only read 2 of her books in my life, but I'm thinking the next time I'm in McKay, whatever Terry McMillan books that I see, I'm just going to grab them because I want to read more of her. But I'm glad I reread this at my big age. I'm glad I reread it. At my big age, it was wonderful. Disappearing X by Terry McMillan.
Well, I did not plan this to be sort of thematic in any way, but I finished Teaching White Supremacy, which I don't know. Did you ever read this? I know we both meant to.
Yes, remember I talked about it. I said it's the one that made me like physically sweat when I was reading it.
This book is such a hard read, so I will say take it in chunks. It took me several days. But this is basically about. Did you recommend this too? If this is a double recommendation, then
it needs
you need to read it. So Donald Yacovone is a Harvard professor, I believe, and he is writing about how textbooks, how like slavery, racism, all that in America gets put into our textbooks and how historically it's been put in our textbooks and how that has changed or maybe not over time. And you look at like the rhetoric and the way we talk about race in America and the differences between the North and the South. And what I really liked is that he puts a lot of blame on the North, which is something that's kind of new. I think one of the things growing up in our age time, I mean, I told you today in a voice note that like talking about Reconstruction period, I don't think Reconstruction was talked very much in our history books. It was sort of like a blip and you kind of moved on to the next part of history. And also I feel like as a Northerner, there's still a lot of like, well, we weren't the bad guys, you know, kind of that is pervasive in everything. And this does a really good job of showing how, you know, you're still incredibly complicit in slavery, even if you don't have slaves, because, you know, you're doing X, Y, and Z, you're profiting off of the cotton, you're doing this, you're doing that, you set up these systems, and even though they didn't exist in you know, Massachusetts maybe, but Massachusetts is a large part of why we have slaves in Virginia, you know, that kind of connections being made. And it's It's a really important read, and I think it's a very important read, particularly now as we're looking at a period where our textbooks are changing, the words we're using are changing. We have a very systematic dismantling of a lot of the progress that has been made. Um, it also gave me a better understanding, I think, of boomers and my parents in general, because
Yes.
I mean, a lot of these texts, like a lot of the misrepresentation in textbooks and problematic things that are in these textbooks are going up into like the mid 60s. So that means
Yes.
that like my parents were being educated with a narrative that wasn't
That's
wholly
right.
accurate to
That's
what was
right.
actually happening. So maybe that explains why you have a generation of people that like don't think they're racist,
Yep.
but are doing incredibly racist things. So I think it's a really interesting read, and I encourage people to read it. But I think Naomi is right; it's going to make you sick. It's going to make you mad.
Yeah.
When they talked about that one woman, I mean, they talk a lot about lynching, but there was one woman in particular who I almost had to pull over because I listened to this, like I do with most nonfiction. It was my car book, and like I was so sick to my stomach for what they did to this poor woman.
Yeah.
And then to remember that we still don't have any anti-lynching laws in this country, because why
Right.
would we? Yeah. So I like federal anti-lynching laws. I don't know state by state. Yeah, I always gotta be careful in America because
Right.
states do
Exactly.
things too, but there's no federal overarching law. So yeah, I highly recommend this: Teaching White Supremacy, Donald Yacovone, America's Democratic Ordeal, and the Flourishing of Our National Identity. Yeah, I think it will help you have a better understanding of lost cause narrative, a lot of things. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it
It's
also
a
made
must
me
read.
it really made me reflect on even like what I was experiencing, because I think it's come up a lot over the years as you and I do this and talk a lot about books online, the amount of things that like I've discovered that even I didn't know about certain things,
Sure.
because of how I was educated. And I feel like, growing up in the 90s, I had a fairly like progressive, enlightened education. Um, but no, there's still like so much to uncover and so much to
Absolutely.
deconstruct and relearn and understand better.
It's really
Uh,
overwhelming.
it is, and I think that like I the amount of times I think back to our discussion of Tommy Orange's book,
Yeah.
and how we were both like, this isn't like the Native story is so not told, and or under explained it to the
Yes.
point where I'm flat out ignorant, and it is
Same.
taking a lot of work to fix that ignorance. And what else is there? It just keeps making me think, like, when I read books like this, when I read about, the Native experience, what else am I absolutely ignorant of?
Yep.
Intentionally was made to be ignorant of.
Yeah.
Um, because it didn't the powers that be don't feel like I need to know that, right?
Exactly.
Um, and like a lot of the excuses that get brought up in teaching white supremacy are like, oh, but if you do that, then you're undermining like the American whatever spirit,
Right.
the American bullshit. Like it's all just bullshit,
Yes. Yes.
patriotic bullshit, and
Yep.
that's upsetting. It's like, no, these are actually people. Like we did a bad thing. Um, and like it's okay to look at something you did that was bad and be like, this was bad. In fact, it's
Right.
really good for you to do that. It's a very healthy thing for you to do that. Like if I did a
Exactly.
bad thing if I did a bad thing to you, the only way we're ever going to heal from that is if I say, Naomi, I did a really bad thing to you, and I'm sorry about that bad thing. I can't fix the fact that I did that bad thing, but like, where are we going to go from here?
But that's the
Right?
difference between when a country wants to heal and when
Mhm.
they don't.
Yeah. Well, I think that the way the country wants to heal is they want to heal in a way that is beneficial to a very specific demographic,
Absolutely.
of which we are actually both not. I may
Right.
I may resemble some of it, but
Right.
not all of it.
Right.
Um, and
Exactly.
and I think that's only going to get worse before it can hopefully get any better. And the only way to, I think, get through this is to continue to educate ourselves, and you have to do it on your own,
Yeah.
because they're dismantling systems that are going to do it for you. And maybe we can maybe somehow that will help. I don't know. I'm so lost.
I know. We're all just like, yeah.
Yeah.
But the books are there. Get
the
them while
books
you
are
can.
there.
Get them while
There's
you
so
can.
many books. And if you can't get the books, there are other ways to get books. Remember, we are children of the 90s, Naomi, and
That's right.
the internet is an interesting place. We grew up with Napster. We grew up with FileWire. We grew up with
It
Wave
sure did.
to get things. So I know it's not ethical, but when we get to a point where we don't have legal access to things, there will be other channels. Just remember
There
that,
will
folks.
be. That's right.
But maybe the children need to learn to not be so loud about it.
Okay? Quietly, children. Quiet.
Children, quietly.
Yeah.
Keep
Exactly.
your mouth shut.
Exactly.
Not everything needs to be made into a 45-second TikTok, okay?
Yes,
We
exactly.
can share things in other ways.
Need to just be a secret. Yeah.
Secret that we share amongst friends.
A phenomenal book. Yeah, it made me so sweaty throughout, like actual like sweat.
Realizing how late into the 21st century that a lot of these concepts were in our textbooks, North and South.
Flabbergasted.
I honestly, because I look at my parents and I'm like, you are these really well-educated people. You are fairly, I mean, oh no, they're very conservative, but like, you've been exposed to a lot of things. Like you're not like, I feel like you should be further along, right? Like I feel like you should be more understanding of stuff because you are incredibly intelligent, and this shouldn't be like so strange for you to process. But if from a young age you were given a certain sort of understanding, narrative, verbiage, all this stuff, it can become, that indoctrination can be incredibly hard to to fix. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with particularly with like race relations in the US is how deeply embedded that is, how how deeply woven it is into our whole culture as a country, and how even when you try to change one thing, they find a new way, like a new thread to tease, and it's so hard. It's so hard. And there's so many things that like I'm sure I do on a daily basis that are not the best things to do, but because I don't know any better, right? And it's like you keep trying to get yourself better, but it's so hard because it's so entrenched in everything.
That's what that book makes you realize. And I think that when I was reading it and I realized that, I think it made me feel I don't know, like trapped in a way, like wow, it's just so woven in, like you can't undo this overnight. And it just made everything in me just feel so tight. That book really got my anxiety like really like up. I mean, like and like I tried to take little breaks, but like some of the stuff I was reading was just like it was compelling.
It is very compelling.
And then I would realize, like, girl, you're actually sweating. You need to like close this effing book for a minute. Like it was a lot going on with my body and my mind reading that book. It was a lot going on.
It's a very eye-opening book, and it also makes me understand why certain groups might be very resistant to things like CRT, because to have to stand and hold that cognitive dissonance, to have to face those things. I mean, I think everybody should do it. But I can understand why that might be incredibly terrifying. So it does make you, I kind of understand the tension, I think, a little even deeper. Instead of just being like, I don't understand why people can't have more empathy. But I think that's kind of living in the world right now, is just understanding that no, it just doesn't exist. And it really is a concept that is taught. You really got to teach empathy, and you can't teach empathy if you're not allowed to say certain words, if you're not allowed to talk about certain stories, if you're not allowed to highlight certain events,
if you're not allowed to learn the truth.
You can't do it. You're only going to teach discrimination of some sort or another to people. So
for sure, he did an incredible job on with that book. Incredible.
So definitely go pick it up. I thought this was gonna be a quick little chitty chat, and this turned into like an hour and a half long episode.
I know. Wow.
You couldn't talk and I just started rambling.
I know. I was like, my nose is completely stopped up. I cannot breathe.
Apparently I had a lot to say. So sorry, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in and dealing with all of this, guys. Thanks a lot. It was a lot.
We appreciate you. Hopefully you're not depressed now.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey. Well, I don't know the outro stuff because you always do it.
I know. It's fine. All right. Follow us everywhere at TBR Lowdown.
Mm-hmm.
Visit our website at tbrlowdown.com. Recommend this podcast to a handful of friends. How many can fit in a handful? 10? That sounds good to me. Recommend this to 10 friends. Leave us a review. And that's going to do it for us. I got to blow my nose again. We are out of here.
Out of here.
Bye.
Bye.